Welcome back to Betting People with Shane Anderson. We're here into part two. So we talked about how you got into racing and sort of your earlier betting memories, but where most people would know you, if they do already, is from your time at racing.com. Now, for those who might not be familiar, just explain what racing.com is for us.
Racing.com is a racing media business that is built in Australia. It's a joint venture between Racing Victoria, which is one of the principal racing authorities in Australia. Racing Victoria oversees the Victorian thoroughbred industry. So the races like the Cox Plate, the Melbourne Cup, Caulfield Cup, they're all run in that jurisdiction. So Racing.com basically started out as a digital platform. So it was there to just be like any other website that had race form and telling stories and so on. But there was a disruption, and this occurred in 2014 when it first started. But there was a disruption in the Australian media landscape at the end of 2014 when a previous broadcaster called TVN blew up. The stakeholders of that business basically went their separate ways. So what Racing Victoria did was they started negotiating with Seven West Media, one of the major media companies in Australia that run the Seven Network, one of our big free-to-air channels. And they partnered up then to turn Racing.com from a digital platform into a fully fledged multimedia business, which included free-to-air television coverage. It included the digital service. It includes some extraordinary social media engagement opportunities and so on. But the big telling factor with Racing.com, and this is what makes it unique globally, is that Victorian and now South Australian racing, which has come on as another partner for the business, Racing.com is on free-to-air, so terrestrial television coverage for your fans in the UK, 7 days a week. It's the only sport, as far as I'm aware, and certainly the only racing jurisdiction that has 7 days a week free-to-air racing coverage on television. And for that reason, we're seeing a massive amount of betting, wagering returns going on the Victorian industry as a result. It's probably now the most bet jurisdiction there is in Australia from a turnover perspective.
Indeed, and we'll talk more later about what lessons, if any, could be learned over here from such a model. You were editor-in-chief at your time there. I guess what I really want to ask is, first of all, when you're editor-in-chief, number one, how did you get that position? And number two, in general, this was a really big sort of innovative measure, like you say, the only jurisdiction where you had free-to-air racing consistently all the time. What was it like to be at the helm of what was such a big operation?
It was exciting, particularly when racing is your passion and you're working for a business that's wanting to do the best racing coverage it possibly can. And we certainly felt at Racing.com that we were world's best practice in a lot of ways. Basically, it emerged when Racing.com first started. My original role was as chief journalist. I was hosting racing radio coverage for 6 days a week with one of our partners. I was writing a lot of content for Racing.com. And then I was also, when it became a television business, one of the lead presenters of that. And in discussions with our then CEO, Scott Perrin, my role basically went from, we love what you're doing as one of our key voices as a presenter, but we think you've got opportunity to help us lead the business in a different direction. So I was able to take that opportunity. It meant that I had to then alter my approach because you can't be everywhere every time, and you certainly don't want to give your audience overkill by them listening to you on radio, seeing you on TV, then seeing all the articles that you're writing, as well as then as a leader of the business, as a manager of the business, influencing the team of journalists and presenters around you. So I eventually then dropped my radio responsibility so I could focus on getting the tone of voice right and looking at what the broader content operation could be for the business. And it was amazing. We for the audience out there who may not still get racing.com, it's no different in a way to what racing TV and at the races is trying to do, or Sky Racing, is I think it's now known in the UK, or any of the other sort of racing broadcasters out there. The difference is it brings this whole multi-platform approach. So we would try and make sure that we were engaging with our audience everywhere, anytime, any place, pushing the product from telling the stories of our participants, the trainers, the jockeys, the horses, the breeders, and so on, challenging the industry when they were making significant decisions, whether it be waging related or funding mechanisms or whatever, creating shows that would be fun and frivolous, as well as deep and quite intense editorial programs and so on. But just looking at all of the options that we had available, from a television broadcast to a social media distribution channel to a digital platform, and how can we link it all together to have this one flow of stories? And we're able to invest in some outstanding young talent. It's probably the thing I'm most proud of at my time in racing.com, that we really tried to bring in some fresh faces, fresh voices to the game. And it's great watching them from afar now blossom. But in the 5 years that I was there, which was from start up to mid of last year, it was some of the great times of my life. And I really think it now has put pressure on other broadcasters around the world that are telling the story of racing to start thinking not just in, I've got a broadcast platform here, but how can we tell a story that extends into a social media platform? Or if we've got a digital platform, how do we bring it all back in? So there's all this cross-promotional opportunities of all of the content that you're creating. And I think racing.com did a really good job of that in my time there, and I think it's still doing a fantastic job of it now that I've moved on.
And speaking of now that you've moved on, I am intrigued as to what was motivating you to sort of make the move, because it's a great position there, huge amount of influence. Race.com continues to be, but was certainly then very successful. How come you came across the world to do what you're doing now?
Yeah, basically, it came down to getting to a stage of your life where you think, and I'm happy to say I'm mid-40s now, I'd been having great success and a lot of fun doing what I was doing. But then when you start taking a breath to think, where's the next 10, 15, 20 years of my life going to be? And one of the frustrations that I probably had in my roles was that I'd had a lot of touch points working globally. I love Australia, don't get me wrong, but there was always something that was playing and nagging at me that I really should have made a move. And I originally had planned to do it in my late 20s, early 30s to make a move to Europe. But then all of the opportunities through the broadcasting back in Australia kept coming my way. It was just proving too hard to actually say, I'm gonna drop everything and take that chance. But then basically it was off the back of Winx's fourth win in the Cox Plate. And I was with my partner and my family around that Christmas period of time, just saying, well, yeah, I'm really comfortable in life. I'm really happy with life. But what's next? Do I stay in this role and keep trying to push boundaries or challenge what we're doing here? Yes, I could have easily have done that. And lo and behold, it wasn't long after that communication came from Better Collective, and things sort of steamrolled from there. And I certainly love the opportunity that's now with me, working in a slightly different field, even though it's still sport and wagering. But the outlook's the same. We're trying to create the best content we can. We're trying to get a market and an audience to respond favourably to product. But yeah, I'm happy with the move. But the other thing I'll just say, I've never been a big believer in people, particularly if you're a broadcast talent, trying to defend your turf for a long period of time. One thing that really makes me happy is seeing the progressive voices and faces and emerging talent come through. And one of the great things that makes me happy is now that I've moved out of my role back in Australia, is I can look back and see so many of the people that I gave opportunities to really get their chance, and they're flourishing. And it sort of gives you that moment of satisfaction to realize, yes, we were investing in the right people. Yes, our strategy was the right thing. So yeah, I'm really content, but I just needed change. I'd been pretty much working 7 days a week in that racing media space for close to 20 years. I needed to change direction a bit so I could reinvigorate myself and just tackle something in a different way.
And speaking about the fan experience and the engagement, you've observed international racing for many years now. What could places like, and I'm particularly interested in, but not limiting this question just to the UK and Ireland, learn from the way that racing conducts itself in Australia?
Oh, but you can learn a lot of things. I think there's so many wonderful things about UK and Irish racing. In the UK is is really the foundation of thoroughbred racing. It all sort of came from the UK. But you haven't evolved as much as you really should have. This notion of not wanting to understand true sectional timing for a race, to me, I'll never understand. You know, to look at building up the best infrastructure you possibly can. I mean, I think, you know, to be brutal, I think the funding of racing in the UK and Ireland is so backward through the levy system compared to other jurisdictions, which has a more probably robust way of deriving funding through wagering benefits. There's a lot you guys can learn through the UK and Ireland, but I think particularly telling the story and of racing using multi-platform approach is certainly one area that could really focus on. But I also think, you know, trying to make sure that in Australia, we've got a structure which is each state runs their own racing jurisdiction, and each state has 3 codes of racing: thoroughbred, harness racing or trotting, and greyhound racing. And we often will have a really condensed program of racing. So it's how you find your piece of the clock that allows your sport to flourish. I think Australia fundamentally does that well. It's not perfect, don't get me wrong, but the ability to move from race to race to race, for a narrative to keep building, for people to be able to get a bet on in a variety of different ways, to me is something that Australia does phenomenally well. An understanding of the clock, they do phenomenally well. That to me, they're sort of the areas that I think someone in, you know, the groups in the UK that are attached to telling the story of racing need to focus on.
Just to end, if you were doing, or if you were, let's say, able to go back and look at your time at racing.com, is there anything actually you do differently now?
Yeah, it's of course you do a lot of things differently. I think we probably would have invested more into elements of infrastructure, because like every business, you've only got a set amount of budget that you can work to at each and every time. We'd probably make some broader budget decisions that could have brought newer innovations into the coverage quicker than what they took. You know, my vision of what the future of racing should look like is that, you know, we need as many camera angles available as possible, whether it be drone footage, whether it be able to fixate on one particular runner per race, you know, to have sectional times broken down a lot quicker into a broadcast and so on. So I think investment into infrastructure, which, you know, I can sit here and say, I wish that was, you know, something we did. The reality was it wasn't just my decision overall. But because I thought we were telling the story of racing as well as we possibly could for that particular period of time with the amount of resources that we had. We were looking at ways of doing things through social media and other platforms and so on. So we're always heading in the right direction. But I think if we could have done something differently, I would have liked to have seen more of an investment coming into infrastructure, which then will allow for more opportunities of innovation to come into a broadcast.
Very well said, and some very comprehensive thoughts. So thank you for them. And we end part 2 of Betting People with Shane Anderson. Thank you, Shane.